Coming up on Theater Talk.
I never met Edward Albee, and I heard that he could be an acerbic fellow, you know.
That's
but
accurate, yeah.
in terms of his work, what he stood for, what he cared about, how he felt about the establishment as opposed to people, it's pretty clear. So attention must be paid.
Don't you think that's just a little bit convenient?
Oh, it's convenient. Who's trying to say it ain't convenient?
I'm talking about finding God in prison.
Any place where you can have your life resurrected, that's a damn convenient place.
After you killed 8 people.
That's between me and God.
And that's very convenient too.
Well, God just happens to be a very damn convenient individual, brother.
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins, and I am joined by my guest co-host, Jason Zinoman of the New York Times, and we are already enjoying talking to the great Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, Stephen Adly Guirgis, yes, humble, whose play, Jesus Hopped the A Train, is now at the Signature Theater and is SRO until November 26th. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, I remember seeing this play as a young critic, and it was a really, formative experience for me. It was this thrilling, kind of visceral, raw play that you really get the sense this is a new voice. You fast forward 17 years, you're at a new stage. You're at the stage where you're the kind of player who gets plays revived. And I'm curious how you compare the two experiences approaching this opening versus the one back then.
Yeah, well, I was really reluctant to, as much as I admired the Signature, to do this residency because I didn't want to be the playwright that starts to be revived. You know, it just seemed like a harbinger of doom, you know. But Paige, who's the new AD, she gave me my first commission at MTC back in the day, and she's always been really supportive, so I said, yeah. So what is it like between then and now? I mean, Jason really was there.
Yeah.
Jason, when he was at Time Out, kind of was one of the first writers to really help launch Labyrinth, going back from Arabia and then with Jesus. So it was almost like not a peer, because critic is not a peer, but so he was there. And at the time, you know, that was like doing the play initially. It was sort of like the beginning of our artistic lives. This is the play that, you know, we started out at Center Stage, it's like a 70-seat theater, and then we moved to CSC. Then we did it at Rikers Island. Then we did it at the Edinburgh Fest. Then we did it at the Donmar Warehouse in London.
And who were we?
The original cast was John Ortiz, Ron Cephas Jones, David Zayas, Liz Canavan, and Salvatore Inzerillo, and directed by it's the late, great, tremendous Phil Hoffman. So at that time, it was like we were growing up together as artists, and we went through so much, so that this play to me, it's not like a play. It's like a home movie or a diary of struggle and sort of yearning. So I was reluctant to even do it again, but they really wanted to do it, so we've done it, and we went through a whole bunch of ridiculous circumstances. We've gone through 2 directors, 3 Luciuses.
And Lucius, we should say, is one of a huge part.
Yeah. The first Lucius
he's a sociopath.
got a movie.
Yeah, okay.
The second Lucius, Reggie Cathy, it was like hitting the lotto. He left not for any bad reason at all. And then the third is Eddie Gathegi, who we literally had to cast within 24 hours, no audition, just like
terrific.
a reel of television appearances. And he's pretty great.
Yeah, he's pretty great.
Let me ask you one question, just follow up. So you didn't want to be the kind of playwright who gets revived. And let me see if I'm right in my guess on why you say that. Because when I saw the original, you know, to me, the kind of theater that Labyrinth put on represented kind of the antithesis of sort of big subscriber theater, Broadway.
Yeah.
So to see it and you know, it was in the small theater. So I wonder, now it's in the Signature, which is where you see Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller and these kind of work. Was there something about Jesus Hop the A Train that felt to you like it belonged in a downtown theater?
We almost got this on Broadway a couple of times, so it's not like no, we have to do it with the broken seats.
Right.
It was just that my connection to the play is it's familial. There was a part of me just wouldn't want to do it with other people. And then also, yes, working at the Signature, which is an amazing theater, an amazing enterprise, but it's different than working at Labyrinth, where I can sort of just do whatever I could do then sort of basically whatever I want. You know, it's different. When the artistic director is your best friend and he's also the director of the play, if we decide like Susan's gonna play this part, it's done, you know? Yeah. Or if we say like Jason's gonna play this part, it's done. And also like, you know, if we're all friends, I know that like Jason isn't gonna like say, yeah, I'm in, and then go leave to do a Spider-Man movie. So there's an element to this, even though there's so much heart, that's, what's it called? The soldiers who are paid to fight?
The mercenaries, I don't know.
A little bit.
Yeah.
So it can feel a little mercenary.
What about when you saw the play on its feet again and you're looking at it, does it feel like a young person's play? Does it feel like written by like a different version of you?
I don't know how to answer it without feeling self-conscious. I mean, I think that I still look at my plays and see the mistakes. So there's plenty of stuff where I'm like, oh, geez, what was I thinking? But then there's also elements, I know Bob Dylan has said this and Neil Young has said this, where when they hear a song that they wrote from a long time ago and they're like, yeah, I don't know how I wrote that. You know, like there is that element. There are big swaths of that play that I just wrote in one go, and that was that.
Well,
and when that happens, it's not you, it's you and something else. And then other sections that you fight and struggle with.
Oh, because when you say, I don't know how I wrote that, what you mean is, I don't know how I was able to channel that so
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember Phil at the time saying to somebody, and I remember at the time I was a little bit insulted, but he was like, yeah, the reason that Stephen's writing is so good is that like, he doesn't know the rules, so he doesn't realize if he's breaking them. He's not self-conscious about it.
Well, that's not insulting at all.
No,
I hear you, but you're a natural.
it was I guess it was a compliment.
Now, I read somewhere that the germ of this play was that you had, now we should say this is mostly two prisoners talking who are in isolation cells, and a guard and another guard and a lawyer. You were inspired by that. You had a friend who went into the Unification Church.
Yeah. I had a friend who joined the Moonies, and myself and his brother and his father and a few others got pretty heavily involved in we did surveillance and trying to like sort of kidnap and deprogram him. And it never worked, you know, but I really dedicated a lot of time and thought and effort into it. And it wasn't until a couple of years later when I first went to therapy for the first time, and I sort of realized that Joey, his name was Joe Leonard, he's actually still a Moonie. My therapist was like, well, yeah, Joey represented your childhood, and you were in an extended adolescence, and if you let him go, well, then what do you have to do except deal with yourself as an adult?
How wonderful the way art happens, that then you channeled it into a play where a guy shoots Reverend Sun Myung Moon, or the equivalent, and then goes to prison.
Yeah, so that was sort of the genesis. And then I also had spent some time in Rikers Island doing arts education, and so I was familiar with Rikers and Spofford, which was a youth detention center in the Bronx, and there was some just some things in there that stuck with you, and then my own sort of struggles of trying to grow up and trying to find a way to be connected to some type of something larger than myself.
Well, I was going to follow up on that and say that, you know, this play begins with Angel trying to pray.
Yeah.
Religious themes are something that show up in your whole career. Why start the play with this image?
I mean, I don't know how I ended up doing it, but what I think it is that in the beginning of the play, we see Angel praying as a child prays. We see Angel sort of at the level of spirituality that most of us never surpass, which is like we pray when we're in trouble. So he's in trouble and he prays. And then we go through the whole play, and then it ends also with a prayer, but this is the beginning of an adult prayer, because it's about taking responsibility, seeking communion, looking for real forgiveness, as opposed to like, forgive me, mommy, but let me go out and play.
And he encounters Lucius, who's a serial killer, sociopath, who's deeply religious, although we wonder whether his religion is
contrived, or and doing research in the play, the Lucius came about. I was staying at a friend's house, and there was a book about the son of Sam, and then there was a 60 Minutes interview with him, I think like some years ago, where he had become born again, and he was saying like, I found God, and now my life has meaning and purpose, and blah blah blah. And you watch it, and you're like, yeah, but you're the son of Sam, and you're crazy.
Right.
Or you're trying to get like an early parole. But then I remember thinking like, well, if there is a God, which I don't know, but if there is a God, like who better is as a test case for God's mercy than the worst person? I still believe that.
Yeah. Well, that's what the Bible says too. Yeah.
Yeah. So slowly this character of the serial killer began to emerge, and initially his desire for redemption was genuine in the writing of the play, until I sort of stumbled upon the fact that actually this guy's a sociopath, so he's incapable of empathy. But what I learned in research is that a lot of prisoners find God in prison. It's like a joke, a stereotype, and we think like, oh, they want an early parole, or oh, they're like faking it, they want different privileges.
But they have a lot of time for that. Yeah.
They have a lot of time on their hands, but also what I sort of learned was that sociopaths are different than us, and they're aware on some level that they're not like us. And they don't want to be. They want to be like us. They're aware there's a difference. And oftentimes what happens...
They don't want to be like us.
Well, no, they that isolation, they wish it wasn't there.
It's interesting because he's pontificating, Lucius is pontificating all this religion, and then several times in the play they say, yeah, but you killed 8 people. And he never says, oh, I'm sorry, I killed 8 people.
Yeah. I mean, he makes a lot of sense for the first 2/3 of the play.
Yeah.
You mentioned Philip Seymour Hoffman earlier, who directed the original play, and as you said, the Labyrinth is very collaborative. What role did he play in the shaping of this work?
A huge role. I mean, what made Phil, a lot of things that made Phil what he was, is that he never would try to tell me what to write or try to steer you in one direction or another. And he would never sort of throw you under the bus as a writer, so that like, if you guys were rehearsing a scene that I wrote and like you had questions or you didn't get it, he'd never say like, well, Stephen's just sort of spitballing here. He doesn't really know what he's talking about. He always took whatever I wrote was like, the 10 Commandments. But then afterwards, he would comment. In the same way, what was great about our relationship is that he allowed me the liberty to talk to actors. And I certainly allowed him the liberty to say whatever he wanted about. Like a perfect example was early on. The play had scenes that took place outside the prison. There were scenes in the lawyer office. There was all this stuff. And one day after we had done a reading or something, he's like like to me the best parts of the play are all inside the prison. And I remember when he said that, I was like, yeah. Okay, thanks, Mr. Helper, but like, I'm writing this paper. And then I went home and I was like, no, he's absolutely right. So how can I, do that? And also, he always unerringly aims for the highest stakes and the most challenging sort of ideals. And maybe I had a little bit of that too, but a lot of that would rub off on me, And also he really, because when you're writing and you have a director, it's like if they stage it wrong, if they do it wrong or they interpret it wrong, your words can sound really stupid. It can sound stupid or not as intended. And the thing is with him, I knew I could write anything, and he would understand it, intellectually, emotionally, and then could communicate it to actors in a way that would bring it to life, and in his thoughts or communication to me, actually helped me take it to a higher place.
Wow.
That's a really special person. You know, he was very willful, as was I. You know, he was stubborn, as was I. But an incredible generosity of and willingness, you know, to just sort of do whatever it takes.
The absence of Philip Seymour Hoffman is one that you know, I definitely still feel in the theater. And this may be an inappropriate question, but I'm curious, do you think about what he would be doing now?
I don't think about what he would be doing. I think about what we might be doing, and not even so much in terms of theater, but watching a ball game, doing stuff like that. I think about that a lot. And then I would say that I got to do American Buffalo this summer with Treat Williams and Ollie Palmer, and it was my first time acting in 13 years, and I was terrified. And I would talk to Phil, you know, and in fact, it was one of the last things that I would do before I went on stage, and whatever I heard back, and it wasn't like a supernatural thing or anything, but like it helped me. Now the result, I don't know. Maybe I was terrible in the play. I don't know, but it sustained me, and it reminded me, like, well, this is why I'm here, and this is what I'm supposed to do, and this is what we do, and I just went out and tried to do that.
You know, and also there's the pain of losing a friend to addiction, which we all know. And I just want to say, I've got a comment online, my favorite comment online. Somebody said, "This show is too political," and that's on you, Susan. I just want to say now, you know, that announcement of how the new Just Say No of the opiate crisis.
Right. We're gonna stop the opiate problem, but we're not putting any money into it.
Yeah, and you look at that and you just say, you don't get this. You don't get this disease.
I'll tell you, just to say one thing about that, is that a lot of people, if they're being honest, will tell you the last person that you ever thought would fall off of that wagon would be him. I mean, he helped everybody else. I remember seeing a picture of him smoking a cigarette, and I was like, but he quit. He doesn't smoke anymore. But the reality is reality. You know, I had a good friend in college who was in trouble, and I asked Phil if he would help him, and Phil tried to help him, and the guy died with a needle in his arm. And a few years later, I had a girlfriend, the same issue. Phil tried to help her. She died with a needle in her arm, and Phil unfortunately passed the same way. So it's, you know, it's no joke. And
no, the disease, no joke.
And the last thing that he would ever want to do would be to leave his kids that way. You know, life, whatever, you know, people can have ambivalent feelings, and, you know, I know there's a certain amount of pain and struggle and blah, 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 but I think he would have cut off his limbs first.
His disease.
And that tells you what that thing is, you know?
Moving on to, you know, like those new things.
Happier
And now,
Right.
we wonder what you ask him about the Albee thing, right?
Sure. There was a controversy earlier about Edward Albee estate not allowing a production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf to cast a black actor. And there was a lot of outrage on all sides. And you spoke out on this on Facebook with kind of a nuanced point of view. And I wonder if you could speak to it.
Yeah, well, you know,
because they didn't want a black Nick, the young man.
Right, they didn't want a black Nick. And I mean, my point of view shifted a little bit. I mean, initially my point of view was like, you know, that's the playwright's wishes. You can't assume that Edward Albee's a racist because he wouldn't want a black guy to play this part. It was written in a certain way. And then you can't assume that the estate is racist. And I feel like, you know, writers have so few rights. And the one thing that playwrights have, and it was hard won, is, you know, the approval over casting, and you have to say the words as written.
No, but what do you say too? Because that is stereotyping African American men, and why can't an African American man be Nick?
This is how I feel. My head feels that that I'm sorry, but this is the rights of the playwright, and that we respect their wishes.
Even though he's dead, right?
Even though he's dead.
Yeah.
Well, when he's dead in 100 years, you can have lots of very imaginative staging. It won't matter. That's what I believe intellectually, but emotionally, after a few days of this, because it never ends quickly on Facebook, it goes on. The thought I had was like, if it causes this much pain for a group of people to be denied or shut down from this opportunity, then maybe the right of the playwright isn't as important. Another example would be like Charlottesville, right? We're all First Amendment people. Intellectually, I understand and support the First Amendment to the fullest, But if it's going to cause an inordinate amount of pain and horror for people to see Nazis marching, then it's like, you hate to ever say in this country, maybe I'm willing to give up some freedom, but,
But part of this, you come from a perspective of someone who's worked in the theater and worked in TV. You wrote The Get Down for Netflix. So you know that in the theater, the writer has a unique amount of power.
That's right. In television, unless you're the creator, and in movies, it's like zero. So anyway, as far as that goes, I think that the playwrights' rights are there for a reason, and I think they should be respected. But at the same time, like, for me, I've never stopped a production. They did a production of Judas with all women. They did an adaptation of Judas with, I think, all African Americans. It's like, I'm not precious about my work in that way. I am precious if you edit it down, which happened recently, but
because you were talking about writing before, and you said, well, I don't know how I wrote that, meaning I don't know how that came out of me. And then in a certain sense, you think, well, Edward Albee, has passed away, and you think, well, the world has moved on. Is he fully aware of the evolution of the world that he's making that restriction?
Right.
Yeah.
But I think he wrote the character as a Caucasian, a white. If you read the play, it's pretty specific.
Well,
and I sees him as it's like a Nazi, literally coming to threaten his existence. For a director, I forgot where this was. Who's like, ooh, I have an idea. We'll make him black and make an interesting comment. It's like, you know what? Can you, if you can stage the play as written expertly,
maybe, yeah.
If you can do an amazing production, if you can realize the vision of Edward Albee in his play, and you can demonstrate that, and then maybe later you want to play around with it, fine. But do you know how hard it is just to get Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf right as written? So it's like, so there's a certain part of me, and I think everyone should have opportunity, and I hope that's reflected in my work and everything that I do.
But wouldn't, to play devil's advocate, the director is an artist too, and there's plenty of great shows where the most interesting work is going on. The director's creativity is the most interesting work.
That's true.
And it's not like there hasn't been many great productions, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which has played it conventionally.
That's true.
So you're coming in from the point of view of a playwright, but...
Well, but also, look, if Peter Sellers wants to do that and I'm the estate, I'm gonna look at it differently than if no disrespect, Joe Blah,
right.
From Reseda, California. To me, as I did further research, it was like some jerk off in a small town who was like, well, I want to do this. And then when they said no, it exploded into a racial issue. And then all of a sudden you get a read on Facebook, a lot of people are like, Edward Albee's a racist. The hell with Edward Albee. Yeah. Edward Albee's dead. Let his cannon die. Right. And it's just I don't know. I never met Edward Albee. And I heard that he could be an acerbic fellow, you know?
That's
but
accurate,
in
yeah.
terms of his work, what he stood for, what he cared about, how he felt about the establishment as opposed to, you know, people, it's pretty clear, you know? So a little bit of attention must be paid. Like,
That's a great point of
that's
view.
all. I'm not trying to shut the door, and also, that's just how I feel.
Yeah.
So Stephen Adly Guirgis, your play Jesus Hop the A Train is now at the Signature Theater. In the spring, they're going to do your play Our Lady of 121st Street, at which time I hope you come back and you, Jason, and I will continue this conversation.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of our questions we haven't even gotten to. That's
I'm
wonderful.
afraid people are going to hate me now. Because
No, because
No,
no.
You'd be surprised.
You can never hate this because, all right. But no, even though I disagree with some of what you said, see, now I'm not
It's
gonna say
okay.
that.
It's all right. But that's what it's.
No.
I think it's very important what you said.
So come back?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Stephen Adly Guirgis. Thank you, Jason Zinoman, my guest co-host. We'll see you next week.
Up here, it's a little different than downstairs. We got a different kind of vibe going on. Vibe? Yeah, brother man. It's a different kind of feel.
Feel.
Yeah, it works out nicely for everybody.
Oh, well, let me, if I may, tell you now about my vibe, my feeling. My vibe is step away from that cage before I come in there and club you to death.
Enough said, brother man, enough said.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Dinelli Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you.